What is up, everybody? I'm NoLuxGiven here with your afternoon snap, and this season is the easiest season yet to hit infinite because now we are getting 5 times the amount of bonus cubes when we hit new ranked levels. So instead of going up to level 81 here for the first time that I have hit 80 this season, this actually puts me to rank 85. And I was able to, from there, quickly get to Galactic, and that's what we're going to look at today. The 9 games on my way up to Galactic in Marvel Snap. For all of these games, I'm going to be playing Shuri Zero. It's a really popular deck right now, and I'm sure that you've seen a lot of people playing this exact list, though I've never tried it out before, so I wanted to give it a spin for myself. And this game's pretty funny. In this one, we're going to be making a pretty interesting use of Titania, which I found is really good. It took me a while to kind of wrap my head around Titania, but it's definitely at its best when your opponent already has 2 cards in that location. Now, if my opponent plays 1 more card to Sinister London, they're going to be locked out of that location for the rest of the game. And that's kind of my plan here. Give my opponent a Titania temporarily, and then I'll be able to take it back whenever I want. And we'll see that my opponent has kind of got a similar idea here because I currently have 2 cards in Sinister London. They are going to play a Titania. I might have to jump ahead just a little bit here. I'm not going to play anything, though, on this turn. They're going to play a Titania, which is going to give them 3 Titanias now, actually 4. They've got all the Titanias. They've got both of mine, and they've got both of their own, but this leaves them unable to play to Sinister London, which means I'm going to be able to win that, and seeing that, they decide to retreat. Another strength to this deck is that it is sort of unleachable. It's not quite unleachable. There's still some cards that you'd rather keep their abilities, like Captain Marvel, Taskmaster, and Arrow, but there's a bunch of cards in this deck that you are trying to make lose their abilities anyways, like Red Skull and Titania. So I'm not super phased when my opponent leeches me this game on turn 4. I go for the Arrow into Titan, thinking maybe my opponent is playing a Galactus deck, but, well, they might be, but regardless, they are leeching us this turn. So that's going to remove the drawbacks from Red Skull and Titania, and on the 5th turn of the game, I'm just going to wind up dropping Sunspot, because Dream Dimension means that I can't really play anything else, so I'll just play Sunspot, and then on the final turn, I'll be able to play both Titania and Red Skull, 20 power for only 6 energy, which is a pretty incredible rate. Now, we did actually have Isle of Silence as one of our locations this game, so maybe we didn't need to get leeched, but it certainly didn't hurt us that badly, so I snap on turn 5, and my opponent retreats. I must say, one card that I have been super impressed with in this deck is Captain Marvel. I didn't think I would be as impressed with this card, and I actually didn't have it in my initial lists. I was trying to do silly stuff with Arnim Zola, and then I realized just a bunch of different things that make Captain Marvel powerful, and I joined everybody else in basically playing this stock list here. Some people will make slight changes to this list. I've seen Polaris get used in some builds of the deck, but for the most part, I think basically everybody is running these exact 12 cards. And in this one, we get to make pretty good use of Captain Marvel because we've got Avengers Compound as one of the locations. So we have to play into the Avengers Compound on turn 5, but my opponent is going to play a Shuried card to that location. So knowing that they're going to be adding more power to Avengers Compound than us doesn't really make me sweat it that much because I'm not actually adding any power to the compound this turn. I'm actually just putting my power into my energy rather into Captain Marvel, which means we'll get to send it elsewhere. My opponent plays Wolverine and then Venom, not a particularly impressive board, but the Wolverine also winds up flipping back into the compound, so they're not adding any additional power elsewhere. And then we both just play 0 power cards into my Cosmo in Grand Central. Kind of silly how this all worked out, but for the final turn, we'll be able to drop Red Skull and then still have Captain Marvel move around, and honestly, I wasn't feeling super confident in this game, but my opponent still retreated to the Captain Marvel on Avengers Compound just seeing that we would have a little bit more flexibility than them. This game I get some really cool locations. Shuri's Lab, which is surely a good location for a Shuri deck to have. So I'm planning on dropping basically a bunch of stuff into the Shuri's Lab as much as I can. Captain Marvel is really good with Shuri's Lab because we can play it in that location, get the doubled up power, and then Captain Marvel could even move into the Nexus later on and spread my power elsewhere to all 3 locations. So that's really sweet. I think that we are doing pretty well on this game just based off the locations alone, though this is a fun one. This was definitely a fun game as well. So I dropped the 10 power lizard, and then we're gonna see Subterranea. We're gonna see some rocks on this one, and that doesn't really hurt me too badly. We don't have a great play for this turn, though next turn, turn 4, we can play Shuri, then we can Shuri the Captain Marvel into Shuri's Lab, and then we could play Arrow on the final turn. And that should stop basically anything my opponent is trying to do, because we can confine them to like playing into Subterranea on the final turn or something, where we get to put a whole bunch of power into the Nexus. So I'm feeling pretty confident, but we'll see what my opponent has got cooking here. They are going to, on turn 5, I don't actually remember what they play here, but let's see. Maybe I'll have to jump ahead a little bit. Oh, okay. There was a power outage there or something, but they are going to wind up waving into the Shuri's Lab. So a little bit of ramp, and this actually has me thinking maybe I might need to play around Galactus or something. So I think I will probably just Arrow into the Shuri's Lab here, because that'll stop Galactus, and that's one of the few ways that we can lose. We can still just play a Captain Marvel without the doubled up power from the Shuri, so that's still the plan. And they have Nimrod, which means this very well could be a Galactus game. And then on turn 5, my opponent doesn't have any sort of ramp, but they do snap, so they've got something cooking, but I think that we have enough ways to interact with my opponent here while also putting a ton of power onto the board. This Captain Marvel play into Shuri's Lab that can then move into the Nexus, I think is just a ton of power. And we've got some really cool disruption. I was just talking about that. We've got Cosmo, which is obviously really good disruption for a Galactus deck, and my opponent hobgoblins me, so it seems like they are probably going to try to throw Galactus into Subterranea, but we've got a way to play around absolutely everything here. We can play Titania, then a rock that we grabbed from Subterranea to give my opponent the Titania and stop their Galactus. Plus, Cosmo will stop Destroyer in the Nexus, and Captain Marvel could still move in there for a win. And my opponent does have the Galactus, and we are able to stop them and take them for 8 cubes. So, thought that was a really, really sweet game. I don't know how often you wind up using Titania like that to stop Galactus, but felt pretty good about that, and my opponent was a good sport as well. And with that 8 cube victory, that brought me up to rank 89.3. So we're pretty close. Next up, I had a mirror matchup where Camp Lehigh gave me Storm. And I don't actually know that it's a mirror matchup just yet. We'll find out that later. My opponent didn't have any early game cards, so that made me feel pretty good about just running Storm out there. And if you're gonna Storm, it makes sense to Storm the Citadel, so that way your flooded location doesn't rotate around on you. And we should be able to win in the flooded location. We've got Sunspot there, so my opponent is pretty unlikely to play to that location even. I am still just going to throw Shuri there, just in case my opponent plays their own Sunspot or something, but I do feel pretty confident that we will be able to take it. Then I just have to win one of the other 2 locations, and because I have Shuri, I'm feeling pretty confident about that as well. So we'll see how we're able to do here. And this is where I find out that it is indeed a mirror matchup. My opponent plays a Shuri of their own. We do win in the flooded location, and then I draw Red Skull off the top, which is like the classic curve with this deck now. I get to play Shuri into Red Skull for 30 power, and then next turn I'll be able to copy that 30 power with Taskmaster, which is just kind of ridiculously powerful and kind of crazy. Now, I draw Captain Marvel here, and that should at least get some of my gears turning. that I should have played around Captain Marvel, because what I wind up doing is I play my Taskmaster, which is right, but I just shouldn't have played my Zero here. I just played it, I was thinking, oh, maybe like differential or something will come up. I should have just not played Taskmaster, put 1 additional point into Sunspot, which would have meant that we win on differential because we would have 60 power to their like 0 power in Hellfire Club. Now, my opponent doesn't wind up having it. They just play a Taskmaster and a Zero of their own, and we do wind up taking them for 4 cubes, but it's definitely worth knowing about. But now, 89.7. But we're not quite there. We are going to get some losses as well on the way. This game actually has some good locations for us with Washington, D.C. and Monster Metropolis. We can make good use of those. My opponent even gives us a rock here, which I will later try to put into Washington, D.C. I'm not sure if we draw it this turn. Yeah, we must draw it next turn. I'm going to skip ahead on this a little bit. My opponent rock slides us to give us even more rocks, and I play another one on, or I play a rock on this turn alongside She-Hulk, but they arrow that rock back into the Monster Metropolis, which is annoying because now the rock in that location is worth 0 power. We are losing in Monster Metropolis, but I think that this game is still close enough that we can probably battle for it. We've got Red Skull plus Titania on the final turn, so that's a lot of different potential options to still add some power to the board. I just have to figure out where my opponent is going to play. That Titania gets a little bit awkward because if your opponent plays there, then they could take the Titania. So I think what I actually wind up doing here is putting the Titania in the Monster Metropolis by itself, because it will be able to win the Monster Metropolis. It'll bring us up to 18 power there, and my opponent can't steal it if they try to play to that location. So Monster Metrop is a good place for Titania, and you can see they don't play to that location, but they play Absorbing Man, copying their arrow, which means that they are going to stay winning in the Metropolis. They even steal the Titania still, and then they finish off with a Dark Hawk in Hell's Kitchen to get me for 2 cubes. In this game, we just have the classic combo, and it's probably against a bot. Their name is Luke. That's pretty generic, and they played a Mystique copying nothing, so I'm not thinking too much of this one, but they're going to Khazar, and then we've got Shuri plus Red Skull plus Taskmaster. I think I do decide to just play this Red Skull into Muir Island here eventually. There's actually a few things that does. It plays around Arrow because then they can't drag the Taskmaster to the same location that we played our Red Skull. It also gives us 1 additional point on our Taskmaster, which isn't that much, but Muir Island will give Red Skull +1 power at the end of the turn, and then Taskmaster also gets to copy that. So that's kind of a cute interaction. And because my opponent has Muir Island full as well, that means we don't have to worry about them Shang-Chiing or otherwise winning the location where we are committing all of this power to. So this should be a pretty straightforward win and a nice way to take the bot for 8 cubes. They do have a pretty nice curve, despite playing a Mystique there just randomly. They're not going to have enough power to defeat a 31 power Taskmaster. And that gets me really, really close, up to 89.9. So to round out this game, I only need 1 more cube, and we've got a pretty nice selection of cards here to potentially grab it. I've got Cosmo into the Stark Tower, and that protects my Sunspot from Killmonger, which is pretty nice. And then I can go Shuri into Red Skull there. Yeah, Cosmo's definitely an all-star, but Shuri into Red Skull, and I will just be playing that Red Skull into Stark Tower. Don't want to play that into Machine World. That will give my opponent the Red Skull, and also don't particularly want to play that into Onslaught Citadel either, because that will double the drawback that Red Skull has. So I'd like to avoid that. I'm just going to drop the Red Skull into Stark Tower this turn, and this is actually nice. It plays around Arrow somewhat next turn, though it doesn't really play around Arrow this turn. My opponent is able to arrow my Red Skull into Onslaught Citadel. I say that it plays around Arrow because they can't then arrow our final card into the Stark Tower as well, so we'd potentially be able to get away with a win. But we have an arrow of our own, so I'm not super worried. We just arrow into Machine World, and then we Titania into the Stark Tower. That'll win us Stark Tower, and then we're still winning in Onslaught Citadel, and that should be enough to grab the win here and get up to Galactic rank. However, the cards that my opponent plays this turn are going to be able to pump up the other lanes. They use a Rock Slide, which makes Darkhawk just big enough to take me in Stark's Tower. So I'm gonna need a few more cubes. So here's the game that actually got me to Galactic. A little bit of a fake out there, but I thought that was fun. I'm gonna play Lizard into Kamar Taj this turn. Don't really want to play to Rickety Bridge ASAP, but we do have armor to potentially play there later, but I'd like to hang on to that to not let my opponent know that we could potentially steal a win on the Rickety Bridge. So that is the plan here. We're gonna play Lizard, and my opponent plays Psylocke, and they've also already snapped, but I'm staying in it. I like my hand enough. We also have Arrow for Rickety Bridge, which is a really nice combo if we're able to get a win in the other location. So that's kind of still what I'm thinking, and I just decided to place the armor. Oh, maybe I rewind this for a second. No, looks like I still make the same play. I just switched the order. Very technical thing there, but slightly better to play my cards in this order. And then we see why my opponent snapped. They've got a turn 3 Wong into Kamar Taj, which could be absolutely crazy. So that is a little bit scary. I don't think I'm going to wind up playing anything this turn. I'm just going to sink all of my power into Sunspot, and that was part of the reason I played Sunspot second. Now a Taskmaster will copy the Sunspot's power, so it's just, I mean, I probably won't need to do that, but that's why. My opponent Mystiques on Wong into Kamar Taj, definitely setting up for some huge plays, but we draw Cosmo, and we still have priority, so that's enough for me to now snap back, and will definitely hose my opponent pretty well here. They are actually going to stay in it for another second, which is important because I believe I still need all 4 of these cubes in order to hit Galactic, but once we flip up the Cosmo, writing is kind of on the wall here. They're gonna magic into Limbo, but we just took so much out of their sails with that play. They were setting up for this all game, and now they aren't going to be able to make use of it at all. And I do believe we are going to see a concession pretty soon here. Let me jump ahead. Oh, we still got a little bit of game to play. Maybe I'm forgetting the end because I play Red Skull into Isle of Silence. That's also a pretty good play. So we get to make full use out of Isle of Silence, where my opponent gets to make no use out of Kamar Taj, and that's a pretty good get. I think that seeing that will be enough. They do play Ironheart and Hazmat, which is a little bit of additional power, but it's definitely not going to be enough. And then I'm going to finish this game off with an Arrow, forcing my opponent to play into Limbo. And then, because it's turn 7, I'll even have enough energy too to play a Zero and a Titania. But they've had enough. They're going to retreat, so that gets me up to Galactic rank. And because of the extra bonus cubes this season, I'm actually starting out there at rank 95. So I will probably shortly be infinite as well, but I wanted to show off my games that got me Galactic in this one today. But for today, that's going to be it for me. So thank you guys very much for watching. I'm No Luxgiven. Peace.